EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and these are my favorite underrated cards in the Commander format. Now, the wording there, of course, is specific. I'm not talking about the most underrated cards. These aren't cards that I can't believe people aren't playing them. I kind of understand a lot of these, why they aren't necessarily in decks. They're just personal favorites of mine that I think are pretty fantastic, are really neat, interesting, and very unique in some of the cases, and are literal favorites of mine. In other words, cards that I'm trying to play in decks and just can't find a great place for them. Maybe you guys can. Let's start out with Symbiotic Deployment. 2 and a green enchantment. Skip your draw step. Ouch. However, pay 1, tap 2 untap creatures you control to draw a card. That's a very powerful ability. This card sees practically no play at all in the Commander format, and I mean really none at all. And I think it's a pretty darn good fit in a lot of decks. Those go wide token strategies, I know it is risky, right? Because, of course, if I have 10 creatures in play, I can tap all my creatures to draw a bunch of cards. That seems fantastic. But then someone board wipes, I have no creatures in play. My Symbiotic Deployment is still sitting there, so I'm skipping my draw step. That seems not great. However, you should have a full hand, right? And you should be able to rebuild your board and get at it again. You also have your commander. Keep that in mind. And I'll just say in particular, I think this is a phenomenal fit in any deck where your commander makes tokens. Because of course, getting to those 2 creatures is super easy. And there's lots of commanders, especially in green, that are doing that, right? So give it a try. It's a little risky, but I think it's a super fun card and can be really, really good. Next up, Antic Learning. And I'm not going to say a personal favorite of mine because all of these are a personal favorite of mine. That's why I'm talking about it. This is one that, man, I haven't found a really good place for it yet. I still keep trying, but it is certainly a card, again, that sees almost no play in the format that I'm really shocked it doesn't get slotted into more decks because it is doing something very specific, but a lot of decks are doing that thing, right? Blue and a blue enchantment. Whenever a land is put into your graveyard from your library, you may pay 1. If you do, draw a card. So again, with the repeatable card draw, funny enough, but it fits really nicely in any deck where you're self-milling. Maybe there's not a lot of decks like that in blue. I mean, a Sidisi deck is a commander that's blue, that's milling yourself all the time. And of course, you're getting a trigger every time you throw a creature into your graveyard. But what if you throw lands into your graveyard? You're probably not getting anything. I guess if you're in a Sidisi deck, maybe Gitrog is just a straight up better option, but this is another option for doing that, right? Every time a land gets into your graveyard, just pay 1, draw a card. Possibly if you're in that Slogurk deck, at least the one I made, where you're self-milling a lot, same thing. I will also point out, and that's why this card probably should get some more attention than what it's getting, these Surveil decks that are becoming more and more popular, right? Surveil is cards going from your library to your graveyard, so that might be an archetype where this is overlooked. If you're doing a Surveil theme, which I think most of those are in blue, but Antic Learning might be a great draw option for you. Next up, Razormane Masticore, 5 mana artifact creature Masticore 5/5 with first strike. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice Razormane Masticore unless you discard a card, which all those Masticores have that drawback. At the beginning of your draw step, you may have Razormane Masticore deal 3 damage to target creature. So before I get into why I like this card so much, bonus points for anyone in the comments that can tell me where the art from this card came from. Of course, it was drawn by this guy, Jim Murray, but the inspiration, okay, there is a movie out there that inspired the art for this card, and if you can tell me what that movie is, bonus points for you. So, first of all, 5 mana 5/5 first strike creature is pretty good even by today's standards. It's an artifact creature, so of course, all those artifact or artifact creature themed decks, it can fit. Where I particularly like it though, is in a theme where you want to be discarding, right? Let's turn that downside into an upside. Of course, at the beginning of your draw step, you deal 3 damage to target creatures. Great. Just pick off one of your opponent's creatures every single draw step. I think that's pretty fantastic. I've used this card in the Commander format before. It doesn't look like much, but it actually is. My favorite fit for this guy is in a Glissa the Trader deck, where I used to have it way back in the day when I had a Glissa deck, because of course, Glissa says, whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you may return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. And of course, you're in an artifact theme, which is good, but more to the point, you're discarding a card. So all you have to do is discard an artifact card on your upkeep, shoot one of your opponent's creatures on your draw step, and then you get that card right back, right? So basically it just becomes kill one of your opponent's creatures every turn. I think it's a really neat card, fantastic art. Maybe you have a place for this card. Next up, Hibernation's End, 4 and a green enchantment, has cumulative upkeep 1, which of course means at the beginning of your upkeep, you're going to put an age counter on it, and then you're going to sacrifice it unless you pay a mana for each age counter on it, which of course can be not great. But in this case, it's one of those few cards where we actually want to be putting age counters on it, because whenever you pay Hibernation End's cumulative upkeep, you may search your library for a creature card with mana value equal to the number of age counters on it and put it onto the battlefield. I know there's going to be people in the comments telling me this is so slow. You're not wrong, okay? And I have played this in Commander before. Getting this out on turn like 5, I mean, you're in a green deck, so you could probably easily get it on turn 4, and then waiting a whole nother turn before it gets something, and then it gets a 1-drop, and then after that it gets a 2-drop, and you're putting mana into it. I know it doesn't seem great. It just is a really neat card, especially in a heavy creature theme. I'm just going and tutoring for a creature every single turn. I mean, think about it this way. Pay 1 mana, put any creature directly into play is great value. Then 2 mana, put a creature into play is also great value. It starts to get more and more worse the higher you get, but at the same time, the higher you get, the bigger the creatures you're getting, right? Obviously, your opponents can remove this before it gets too high, but that's fine because you probably don't want to be paying too much mana anyway. It's just a neat tutor option, repeatable, obviously, tutor option for a creature deck in the Commander format. Speaking of tutoring, this is a really neat tutor option in blue you might not be aware of. Parallel Thoughts. I think I had this in a deck briefly and took it out because I didn't really necessarily need it there. But again, it's not so much about need. It's also about trying to fit these cards in a deck just because they're interesting cards. So 3 blue enchantment. When Parallel Thoughts enters, search your library for 7 cards, exile them in a face down pile and shuffle it. Then shuffle your library. If you would draw a card, you may instead put the top card of the pile you exiled into your hand. So this is tutor for 7 cards. That's pretty good, right? 5 mana tutor for 7 cards. And then, whenever you would draw a card, instead, you can randomly essentially take a card out of that pile and put it into your hand. So when you get to 7 draws, you will eventually end up putting all those cards into your hand. Now, I know people will say the drawback of this card is if someone destroys it, those cards are just gone. Obviously, they're in exile, and if someone blasts this with their Krosan Grip, you're just never going to get those cards. They're gone. So my advice is don't just go and search for your win con or your most important cards or those cards you actually need. If you go search for a bunch of cards that are the combo you're trying to assemble in your deck, your opponent can very easily shut all that off by just destroying this. I wouldn't do that, right? Don't use this card that way. One funny way to use this card, and I ended up putting this in the Cosima deck I made on my channel. You go search for 7 lands with your Parallel Thoughts. If your opponent destroys it, who cares? You lost 7 lands, no big deal, right? What ends up happening there is you're just guaranteeing yourself a land drop. You go search for 7 basic lands even, and then it essentially kind of turns into an abundance where I'm just choosing to draw a land, right? This is a may. You don't have to choose to use your Parallel Thoughts. So if I want to make a land drop, I just choose to draw from my Parallel Thoughts instead. I know I'll be getting a land. It's random, but I know everything I've exiled with it is lands. So now I'm guaranteeing myself a land drop if I'm in that Cosima deck or any, blue deck that wants to be making land drops. So that is very important as well. And I guess in a Tatiova deck or an Icy deck, hold on a sec, now I can search for 7 lands. And when I play a land, I get to draw a land. So that might work there as well. If you're playing a wheel deck, that's another place where I think this card's a really neat fit because, of course, everyone's going to draw 7 cards. So if I go search for 7 cards and then I cast a wheel, all those 7 cards just go directly into my hand because I'm about to draw 7 cards. And so I get those 7 cards, right? So that's a great way to just immediately get all those cards out of exile and into your hand, right? So I actually think this is a really neat card that certainly deserves some more attention in the format. Next up, Wheel of Sun and Moon, 2 hybrid Selesnya mana, so white and green, but only cost 2 mana. Enchantment, Aura, because it is an enchant player. If a card would put into enchanted player's graveyard from anywhere instead, the card is revealed and put on the bottom of the player's library. So this is a replacement effect, very important to note. Another card where the art is fantastic. Maybe that's one of the reasons why some of these cards I'm a big fan of, because they have really interesting art. I like this card because it fits into the category of so many cards that I like in the format of I can use it on my opponents or I can use it on myself. This is a fantastic graveyard hate card. If you're playing against that Marin deck, for example, If a card would be put into their graveyard from anywhere, it instead gets revealed and put on the bottom of their library. They can't discard cards into their graveyard. They can't entomb cards into their graveyard. They can't mill cards into their graveyard. They can't put cards into their graveyard through any means at all. That's a pretty powerful effect, right? If I'm putting this in my deck for myself, like say, I want to use this on myself so I don't get milled out, right? Again, there's so many situations where this card can be fantastic. Oh, I got this in my hand and I'm playing against a Phoenix deck. Oh, I guess I'll use the Wheel of Sun and Moon on myself and my opponent won't be able to mill me out. Oh, I'm playing against a Marin deck. Guess I'll use it on that guy. Or I just want cards to be shuffled back into my library because I have lots of important cards in my deck. A Sisay deck is a particular commander where I think this is a slam dunk because, of course, your commander gets to tutor for stuff. And geez, I guess the other Sisay as well, I should clarify. Captain Sisay or Sisay Weatherlight Captain are both white-green commanders that can tutor for stuff. So if you got a commander in white and green that can tutor for stuff, obviously if that thing gets destroyed, it will go to your graveyard and then immediately go back into your library so that you can go get it again, right? So it's a great way to reuse stuff. Really fantastic card and really underrated card, in my opinion, in the Commander format. All right, next up, Soul Separator. Hear me out. I know what everyone's going to say for this card, but let's first give it a read. 3-mana artifact, pay 5, tap, sacrifice Soul Separator, exile target creature card in your graveyard. Create a token that's a copy of that card, except it's a 1/1. It's a spirit in addition to its other types, and it has flying. Create a black zombie creature token with power equal to the card's power and toughness equal to that card's toughness. So I know everyone's going to say 8 mana to reanimate my commander or something to that effect. I really don't like that. I'm going to go off a bit of a tangent here. I hate when people say that. This is not 8 mana. This is turn 3. I play this because I have nothing else to do on turn 3. How often early in the game do you have nothing better to do, right? Just turn 3, I play this because I got nothing better to do on my turn. And then the game goes on. Then later in the game, this is sitting there and I can pay 5 mana to use this. Paying 5 for the activation for this is not bad. Now you're going to exile target creature card from your graveyard and you're essentially going to create 2 different versions of it. One of that version is going to be a zombie with the power and toughness. The other version is going to be a 1/1 spirit with flying that has essentially all of the abilities. And that's where I like a card like this. I'm going to use this on my commander likely. And in particular, I like this in a deck where, I mean, obviously recursion isn't much of an option, so probably not a black deck or maybe a white deck as well. I want to use this in a color where I don't really have recursion, and I also have a commander that very specifically fits this. I guess if you're doing Spirit or Zombie Tribal, maybe, but likely if you're doing Spirit or Zombie Tribal, you're in colors that do recursion well, so maybe it's not going to work. Obviously, if you're using this on your commander, you're going to let it go to the graveyard. Then when you exile from the graveyard, you just put it back in the command zone, so you're not really out anything, right? It just essentially gives you a reuse of your commander that you wouldn't have gotten anyway because you just had your commander die and sent it to command zone, right? Instead of leaving it in the graveyard. Let's go over the ideal situation for a commander like this. And Drakuseth Maw of Flames is a commander where I think this is a slam dunk, in my opinion. 4 red, dragon, 7/7 with flying. When it attacks, it deals 4 damage to any target and 3 damage to each of up to 2 other targets. This is the perfect kind of commander where I would like to use a Soul Separator, and I'll tell you why. Obviously, you're in a mono red deck and you have a very expensive commander. Your commander dies. You let it go to the graveyard, and again, 5 mana to get a sort of resurrection effect ain't bad if your commander costs 7 and is going to cost 9 to recast it, right? So I let it go to the graveyard. I then used my Soul Separator, and what's going to happen is I'm going to create a 7/7 zombie, which is pretty darn good, and I'm also going to create a 1/1 flying spirit that when it attacks, I deal 4 damage to any target and 3 damage to up to other target creatures, right? That's where I really like Soul Separator, is a commander that has a really, really fantastic stapled on ability that I can give to that 1/1 spirit, but also has a big power and toughness, so I can create a really scary zombie as well. So I get a double whammy there. I get a big scary zombie in play, and I also get that flying spirit that whenever it attacks, I get to throw a bunch of damage around, right? So I think it's a great fit in a deck like that where you have a commander that fits that very specific scenario. All right, moving on, let's talk about Wave of Terror, 2 and a black enchantment. Again with the cumulative upkeep 1, and at the beginning of your draw step, destroy each creature with mana value equal to the number of age counters on Wave of Terror. They can't be regenerated. So again, a card that actually cares about the cumulative upkeep that you are paying. And this one I am mentioning for a very specific reason. This is just such a neat card. It is a black board wipe on an enchantment that gets bigger and bigger, right? It's just so very unique. And I've always wanted to find a deck to put this into. And where I think it is a slam dunk is in a token theme, and I will explain why. The wording on this card is very important, or at least the updated wording on this card, right? The original wording says at the end of your upkeep, the errata text says at the beginning of your draw step. So what's going to happen is on your upkeep, of course, you will pay the cumulative upkeep, and then immediately after that comes your draw step, and you will destroy each creature with that mana value. Now, why that is important, of course, is because I'm going to play this card, it's going to do nothing, and then on the very next turn, I'm going to pay the 1 upkeep and then destroy each creature with mana value 1. Now, why that is significant is because you're skipping over the zeros. And of course, what is the most popular thing in the Commander format that costs 0? Of course, it's Ornithopter. No, just kidding. It's actually tokens, right? So what Wave of Terror does is it skips over the tokens. Wave of Terror will not destroy tokens. That's where I really like it. If you're in a black deck that is playing lots of tokens, whatever those tokens may be, Wave of Terror might be a great inclusion there because it's going to start destroying everyone else's creatures, but it skips over the tokens. Next up, that's right, I'm talking about Evolving Door again. I promise it will be the last time. 2 and a green artifact, pay 1, tap a sacrifice creature, count the colors of the sacrifice creature, then search your library for a creature card with exactly that many colors plus 1, exile that card, then shuffle. You may cast the exiled card, activate only as a sorcery. So this is a card I got really excited about when it came out. A lot of people realized very quickly that it's not nearly as good as a birthing pod, which of course it is similar to sort of. And so for that reason, it sees almost no play in the Commander format at all, because of course you have to pay the cost for the creature you're searching for. I will bring up 2 really great ways that you can use this card that I think people should give consideration for. I just put this in the Ovaya deck I made on my old Commanders Getting Better series, where I really think this is a fantastic fit. Again, very niche, but if you have a commander that is making tokens that is less colors than what your commander is, right? So in this case, Ovaya is making colorless tokens, so you can sacrifice your colorless tokens to go get any monocolored creature in your deck. Pretty great. If you have a 2-color commander that is making monocolored tokens, of course, you're going to sacrifice those tokens to go get a 2-color card. If you're in that situation, you will sacrifice your monocolored tokens that you are making to go get 2-colored creatures out of your deck, and then we can go up from there, right? That's where I think this is a pretty neat fit. Also think it's a pretty great fit in the Exile Tribal scenario, because of course, this is exiling that card and then you are casting it. So if you have a commander that says play cards or cast cards from exile or cast cards from anywhere other than your hand, Evolving Door might fit there as well. Give it some consideration. And lastly, I'm going to talk about Path of Metal. Again, another card that I just think is really neat in the Commander format and sees almost no play at all. I guess it is pretty niche, but there is a lot of commanders out there where I think it might be able to fit. So red and a white legendary enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each creature that doesn't have First Strike, Double Strike, Vigilance, or Haste. So there you're already sort of alluding to the decks you want to play it in. I mean, dealing 1 damage to each creature that doesn't have First Strike, Double Strike, Vigilance, or Haste can be pretty good. Actually do a lot of damage there, right? Against like a Goblin deck or a Saproling deck, something like that. However, why you want to be putting this in your deck more so is whenever you attack with at least 2 creatures that have First Strike, Double Strike, Vigilance, and or Haste, transform Path of Metal. And on the back, it's a land, Metzali Tower of Triumph. And I think it's a really good land, especially in the Commander format. Taps add 1 mana of any color. That's great. However, you can pay 1 and a red and tap it. It deals 2 damage to each opponent. And of course, that's something that you could just be doing every turn. Or you can pay 2 and a white and tap it to choose a creature at random that attack this turn and destroy that creature. And I've flipped this over in a Commander game a couple of times, and I'll just tell you, you just leave this bad boy open. You are never tapping this for mana. You just leave it untapped. And what ends up happening, this is why this card is so good in a Commander game, it is a phenomenal pillow fort effect. Choose a creature at random that attack this turn. Who's going to attack you when you have this up? Of course, it's at random, but if your opponent attacks with 2 creatures, are they going to want to lose either of those creatures? And this sitting on the battlefield untapped is a great deterrent to do that. I will also point out this is choose a creature at random. This is not targeting. Fantastic ability against a Voltron strategy. Your opponent has that Voltron commander that has hexproof that can't be targeted, that they're going to smash you with. This is going to get it. And again, if they're only attacking with that Voltron commander, of course, choosing at random means there's only one choice to be made, so the random part doesn't apply anymore. Another funny thing you can do here that I've done before is if this is sitting on the battlefield, deterring your opponents from attacking you, of course, on the end step before your turn, now that no one's attacked you, you can just activate the other ability to have it deal 2 damage to each opponent, or you can activate it to choose a creature at random that attacked this turn but attacked someone else. It doesn't even have to be you. It could be another player that was attacked. Just any creature that attacked this turn. So on the end step before your turn, you can say, all right, well, maybe I'll deal 2 damage to each of my opponents, or maybe my opponent attacked with a couple of creatures and I'll just choose one of those at random to destroy. Great abilities, really, really fantastic abilities to have in a commander game, but of course you got to flip it over. So where are you going to play this? Of course, it's got to be a white-red deck, and I think any deck where you have a commander that has at least one of these abilities, first strike, double strike, vigilance, or haste. Of course, there's a whole lot of commanders that have those abilities. That's an easy one. Any commander that's giving those abilities is particularly good. Obviously, the easy one here is a Samut deck, because of course, Samut, I mean, it has the double strike, vigilance, and haste, but also gives your other creatures haste. So flipping this over in a Samut deck is just going to immediately happen, essentially, right? You're going to play it, then you're just going to attack with 2 creatures, and it's immediately going to flip over. And it's going to be this fantastic land sitting on the battlefield for the rest of the game, just giving you tons of value. So a deck like that, I think it's an absolute slam dunk. Really, really great card, I think, and super, super underrated in the Commander format. All right, there you go. 10 cards that I think are really underrated in the Commander format, yes, but also my personal favorites, right? These are my favorite underrated cards that don't see a ton of play, and even I am not playing them currently, and I'm trying to find room for them. I'm working on it. Maybe you guys can find room for them in some of your decks where they fit. Let me know in the comments below if you are doing so. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.